You need to mute your mic. Look, hit that check mark right there.
Both of these.
Welcome to United Shades of Gray, Conversations of Race in America on 100.5 and 790 News Radio WSGW and online at WSGW.com. Here is your host, Kareem Bowen.
Hello, this is Kareem. You've tuned into another edition of United Shades of Gray. We're so excited that you're here with us on today. We're going to do something that is a little bit different than we have before. I'm going to start a series on today, and we're going to begin a conversation, hopefully with some ideas on how we can begin to make some serious changes as it relates to the issues that we've talked about over the past several months in terms of systemic racism. So I'm glad that you guys have tuned in today. I see some of you guys coming in via social media. And I know that we are doing something, we're streaming quite a little bit different on today. So if those of you who are listening that are in the stream, if you could just let me know if you're getting that audio feed as we are having this conversation on today, I greatly appreciate it. But anyways, we're here today with my producer, the Rob Father. Rob, why don't you give a shout out to the USG, United Shades of Gray audience?
Hello, United Shades of Gray audience. I'm happy to be here. Happy you're here, Kareem, safe and sound.
All right, so he is here. I got two cameras, two angles shot on me. I guess he doesn't want to be seen on today, but it's all good.
No.
It's all good. But we're going to begin. Today, I want to start a conversation on the origins of systemic racism in America. And I want to talk about not just systemic racism. We're going to get to today, we're going to be laying out the foundation on what we're talking about as we talk about the origins. We'll talk about it, we'll define it. But then we're going to, and we're going to look at key areas. We're going to look at education. We're going to look at business. We're going to look at business, education, finance, as well as housing. And we're going to see how we are impacted today based upon some of the issues that existed. But in addition to that, we're going to plan this thing out for 4 weeks. I'm going to bring some individuals that are in here. We're going to talk about today something called cultural competency of cultural capitalism, which is something that a great friend of mine, Gene Pickleman, and we were talking this weekend, and we were talking about the importance of that. He is a guy that's running the branch that's here in Saginaw. We're going to talk about how all of these different programs and things that companies are doing to make some serious change. I know oftentimes we diagnose issues and the problems. We talk about those problems, but we never get to solution-oriented moves or objectives that we can take to make change happen. So today we're going to begin by doing that on today. So shout out to all of you that are out there on today. Let's begin this conversation. You know how we do it here at United Shades of Gray. Those of you who have tuned in before, we begin by talking about what's hot off the press. There's a lot hot off the press, a lot going on today. Most of you are aware of heard something about the pipeline. Someone says, I don't know anything about a pipeline hack or attack, but I do know that they're saying that gas is a shortage. People are beginning to freak out and run amok. They're hoarding gas like they were doing toilet paper. But there was a Colonial Pipeline cyber attack that took place on May 7th. And this Colonial Pipeline was hit, and it was stopped, actually. Some of the origins on how the flow of that oil was taking place was stopped and completely shut down. And as they were talking, I was listening to what officials were saying today. They were saying that the real problem is less of the fact that we are in a shortage, but a greater issue is the fact that people are panicking. So they're mass buying like they were doing with toilet paper. Couldn't find toilet paper during the beginning of this pandemic for anything. It was like rare black gold. So anyway, so they are asking us to just kind of be patient. Things are being shut down. But what this does is it shows us how we're vulnerable as a nation. As we sit here and gas prices are going up, they're rated at $3, and I know they were having shortages, especially the southeastern portion of the country was experiencing a number of shortages. But hopefully that doesn't become a pervasive issue across the nation. But what this does say to me is that there are some things that we have to do. We were talking about our elections being hacked, Rob. We saw how that played out. They were hacked again in this past election in 2020. Now we're having our infrastructure attacked. And, I watched a movie a while ago, and it was showing how there was a cyber attacker that actually went in and he hit our infrastructure. So he hit our power grids. He hit our systems, our driving grids, and he just began to create havoc to where the system could no longer operate. Most of what we do now is online. We use computers for every single part of our lives. And so we now understand there's a greater importance for us to be able to protect ourselves. So cybersecurity, young people, if there's someone out there looking like, what should I go to school for? Cybersecurity, it is, in fact, the wave of the future. It's where the money's going to be. It's going to be where the money resides, as I often say. So I want you guys to understand we've got to begin to put those systems in place so that we can protect ourselves, our nation, when they're now doing bullying, Rob. And so what they're doing is they'll go in and they'll hack a particular area of a company. And once they get into that company, they'll use it to go in through the back door. Then they lock the company out of their own information. And then they bribe the company. They say, you know what, you've got to now pay us a ransom in order to get your information back. And most companies are paying it because otherwise they would have to be basically start from the bottom. Where does this happen at? This sounds like something off of a movie or something. And now we're seeing and experiencing this in real life. What are you thinking, Rob? I see something on the edge of your tongue.
This has been played out years ago, back in the 80s, as a fantasy situation on some movies there, and on science fiction movies and science fiction programs. So it's not anything. It's just that reality from fiction has now become, or nonfiction rather, has become fiction, or vice versa. You see, so that's come true. And now Bitcoin is a big deal. Cyber paying by cipher.
Yeah, they're paying by. That's how they pay. Yeah.
And if you're not ready, this is the whole thing about improving our infrastructure here. People think infrastructure is just about pipes and things of that sort in streets, but there's a whole lot more, like you just said, the electric. Down in Texas, this past winter is an excellent example, where Texans decided to go through a private source to provide electricity, whereas when that crashed, there was no backup for that sort of thing. So, we need to focus our attention on that. And as you mentioned earlier, if you want to get into something that's lucrative, get into things about cybersecurity. We've been talking about cybersecurity for the last 30 years.
It is, but it is here. And as we see, it's here to stay. The more, the way they were accepting payment was through cryptocurrency. So now we're using cryptocurrency, not just as a way to make money, but it is the new way of paying ransom when you are being bullied or taken hostage by some corporate hacker aggressor. So it's interesting. So I want to give a shout out to, while we're doing this, Ricardo, and I'm about to kill your name, Ricardo. Take it, charge it to the head and not to the heart. I'm going to try it anyways. Ricardo Quintanilla, you let me know if I got it right or not.
On SGW, know him as Rick Antonio for short. He's our newsman here at WSGW. So he's Rick Antonio for short. And if he's listening, he can come into the studio and just give a shout out real quick.
All right. So we appreciate it. He's making sure that we get things taken care of here. Let's continue right along. He's a great guy. Next, we have been looking at Liz Cheney. It is official now. She is the ousted. She was the third ranking Republican official in the U.S. House of Representatives. She was removed, and largely, I listened to her speech that she gave on Tuesday night, and she was just saying, "Listen, I'm not backing down." And we're not talking about some newcomer. This is a woman who she is a legacy as it relates. Her father was the vice president of the country at one point, one of the leaders in the Republican Party, and now has been ousted. And her response, the reason she knows and understands that she was removed is because, thanks for the shout out, looking good on Twitter. It looks good, buddy. So she says that she was shut out of the party because she would not continue the lie. And as we look at this is, and I talked about this a little bit on last week on What's Hot Off the Press, but this is something that we've got to begin to understand how important this is. Our parties are essential to bringing diversity to our governing systems. And if there is a party that is being hijacked by a single philosophy, and this goes back to the concept of why diversity is important. Equity, inclusion, and diversity. And I tell people this all the time. Diversity is always, it's the touchdown. It's what we ultimately desire to do. And what this shows us is that we've had a lack of diversity for a long time. Our political parties, be it Democratic or the Republicans or independents, are all led by, a particular type of individual, and has kind of been run by the systems at play. So we had an individual come in like the cyber attackers, and he has basically hijacked the party and he's taken them ransom. And so now we see the casualties of this infighting. And I say this because we see our Republican Party taking place, this happening with the Republican Party, but it's very easily something that could happen to every other party. And as you said, Rob, I think you made a prediction that we would see another conservative party of some sort that would probably arise out of this. And I think that the more and more we hear these stories, I think you're a lot more right.
Yeah, the parties, the only way someone can have something on you is if you have something to hide. So I will assume, probably correctly, that a lot of these Republicans, as well as Democrats too, have things to hide in their personal lives. And when you have that sort of thing happening, someone says, "Well, I will expose you," then you submit. So the same thing happened to a Democratic Party or Independent Party, what have you. It's just a matter of just keeping your nose clean and doing the right thing. If you represent the people, then do so honestly as best as you can, and make sure that you don't have all these little scandals and things in the background.
Man, you got to keep your nose clean,
because politics is a dirty business, and if you're not straight up when you go in there, then you shouldn't be running at all.
Rob, sounds like you're saying that they won't be having any draining of the swamp going on anytime soon.
Oh, the swamp has gotten increased, The swamp
alligators, ticks, Lyme disease, all of it's out there.
Well,
all right.
Well, I think of septic tanks.
All right. I want to continue. I reported the story and we shared this about Andrew Brown, the 42-year-old guy from South Carolina, that was murdered. He was shot a week or so after George Floyd was given justice by the triple conviction of Derek Chauvin. And now we see a little bit more footage is coming out. We see that the South Carolina is now releasing additional footage only to the family. They were allowed to see some additional footage of this event. Not all of it. There's about 2 hours that is out there. They're still fighting. This is not considered public information, so you can't FOIA, Freedom of Information Act. That's what FOIA means. You can't FOIA this information, just get it freely as a member of the public, because it's not considered public domain. But they did allow the family to see some additional footage as it related to this, and it doesn't seem to be getting any better. As a matter of fact, the attorneys for the family are saying that this was an ambush killing. When you look at this, it appears from what we're told, and remember, all of this is hearsay because we haven't been allowed to see any of it.
Supposedly, from what I understand, the judge is going to allow public viewing at the end of the month or within a month's time, is what I understand.
So we hope that happens,
right.
And this can get real messy real fast. Because it would appear to one, and even though that this is the system that they have in play, it would appear as though there's a cover up and people are hiding information. And so we're going to look at this. We'll continually keep you aware of this. But we did know, as I just said on before, that this was an execution kill, meaning that he was shot in the back of the head. The officers were saying, hey, he was trying to hit the officers. And now with this new release footage, the attorneys and his family are saying he was definitely turning the opposite direction. So we'll keep you in tune to what's going on there. we have an issue with policing in America. We're going to talk a little bit about that even in our conversation on today. But lastly, what's hot off the press, COVID-19 vaccinations has received its emergency authorization for children ages 12 to 16. This is really something. I mean, this is groundbreaking in terms of how fast all of this is happening. It is happening in light and warp speed. I've gone from not wanting a vaccination, saying that I would not take a vaccination, to being fully vaccinated after some further investigation. My family has been vaccinated. We just heard Mayor Cuomo or Governor Cuomo in New York saying that if you're interested in coming back to school in the fall as a college student, they're saying you must be vaccinated. So get vaccinated now. I'm believing that will be a sentiment. And I don't know how I feel about that, Rob, because I think our freedoms are very important. And I think that this is just like abortion. I think that even in the idea or the case of abortion, women have the right to do what they want to with their body. I am a pro-lifer. I think that we should, keep all children, babies alive, fight for them, from cradle to the grave. But I also do understand that people are going to do what they want to, and we should not create laws to force our opinion to other individuals. All right. We got the man.
Well, since we're co-workers, let me do the introduction.
Go ahead.
Rick Antonio is our news man at WSGW, so I brought him in so he can say hello to the United States of Gray Coordinating School on Kareem's side, so everyone can see who you are, Rick. We want to thank Rick Antonio, and I'm now still in Kareem's thunder here, but we want to thank Rick Antonio for training me and getting this show and a video here for United Shades of Gray. His expertise has been valuable here, and so I know Kareem wanted to give him some credit, but I want to give him some credit because I'm the producer here, so I need to be able to give credit as due. So thanks so much, Rick.
And Rick, let me get pronounce your name the right way, Rick.
Your last name.
My real last name.
Your real last name.
Yes.
Quintanilla. All right.
I know.
Ricardo Quintanilla.
I know. We were talking with Larry the other day. He does a whole bunch of stuff with Selena. Same last name.
That's Larry Darty of the following show.
Quintanilla.
Yeah.
Awesome. So we thank you. He has been integral in making sure that we can provide a better experience for those of you who are coming in. So I want to just give a shout out to him and say thank you for all that you're doing around here. It's greatly appreciated by me and Rob. We greatly appreciate you. Those of you who are tuning in and listening to this conversation, we want you to stay tuned to what's going on. We're going to continue our conversation at this minute. We're going to talk about origins of systemic racism in education. And Rob, just let me know right now, are we good to start the conversation, or should we hit this on the other side of the commercial break? No. We're looking good. All right. So he's giving me the indication. So we're going to get into this. We're going to begin this conversation. And the way that I want to make this happen is I want to begin by creating a platform that we can step by step walk through this. Let's talk about what it is as we talk about the origins of what systemic racism is. There's been a lot of debate, some of our national leaders, and we've created a political situation out of something that is really a human rights issue. And so I want to talk about what is systemic racism. And if you are an employer, a boss, or, if you're just out there in the community and you're saying, listen, I don't get it. I don't think that exists. It doesn't make sense to me. I want to take you through where this originated, then how it manifests in our different systems. And then we want to take a look, and I'm going to bring in some individuals that will represent education, the business world. We'll talk about housing, finance, the different areas of the different systems, and how they are purported, and how they exist based upon what has happened in the past. So there is, starting off, there's a cartoon. There was a great cartoon in the New Yorker depicting there's a massive hill. And on this massive hill, at the top of the massive hill, there was a signpost at the bottom of this hill, and it said, recognizing racism in America. So if you could imagine two individuals, a black man and a white man, and there's a post at the bottom of this hill that says recognizing race in America. And then at the top of this hill, they can see up there is a white hiker and a black hiker. And at the top of this hill, there's another sign that says doing something about it. And so the white hiker looks at it and he says, I'm exhausted. While the black hiker points to the signpost at the top of the hill, and the caption reads, actually, we're just getting started. And so when you look at this is how we feel I know that it is an exhausting conversation.
That's why we said we're tired.
We're tired. Absolutely. And I think that everyone's tired, and we're tired in different ways. And I think that this is important. And I want to acknowledge today that I understand. I really do understand the fatigue. And oftentimes when we have these conversations, it's usually POCs. And when I use the term POC, I'm talking about people of color. So let me give you a couple definitions.
Before you go into that, though, let me explain our tired situation here. Black Americans and people of color are tired, yes, but I must also say that we know white people are tired too, because a lot of them say, why are we talking about racism all the time? The bottom line is, if we didn't have racism in view here in America, or racist things happening, or discrimination happening, we will not need to talk about it. But I mean, it's just like breathing air. If air is clean, no one talks about it. If air is dirty, we talk about it.
Well, that was the point that I was going to make. So thank you for making it for me, Rob.
Okay.
But moving in that understanding, that is very key. We recognize that. And oftentimes when these conversations happen, it's usually POCs referring to people of color. And then you'll hear us say ADOS or ADOS. Those are African descendants of slaves. And those are two very different individuals, or two very different groups. And so as we have this conversation, I think it's important for me to give that definition, because as we talk about systemic racism, I'm not talking about POCs. I'm not talking about people of color. I'm talking about African descendants of slaves. And the reason why it's important is because the experience of the Negro, or the Black man, or the African American that we now have in America is a very different experience than the Native Americans that are here in the country. They are very different from the Asian Americans that have migrated to this country, and also very different from the Hispanic or the Latino American that has migrated to this country, or immigrated to this country. And so as we have this conversation and we're talking about the origins of systemic racism, it's important for you to understand that I'm coming from the perspective as a Black man of my African descendants who were at one point slaves in America. All right. And so as we begin to look at this, gotcha, Rob. Thank you. As we look at this, we're going to talk about how this originated, and we're going to begin this conversation because this platform is now beginning to cement itself into various ways. It has for years. All right. So following the Civil War, and we've talked a little bit about this, but following the Civil War and emancipation of enslaved African Americans, or ADOS, as we said, Congress passed 3 constitutional amendments in the 1890s, at the 1860s. That was the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th Amendment. All right, so Africans were slaves. African Americans we were Africans because we weren't Americans at that time. During the time, and it's important for you to understand, when the Constitution of America was written, it was believed that the Negro slave, as we'll say it, was only 3/5 human. So he was not considered to be a real human. So if he was not a human, there was no way he could have citizenship. There was no way he could have the right to vote or to own land, possess property. And so he was considered a possession. And I think that when we look at how history has portrayed this, it's important for us to dehumanize an individual in order for us to bring credence, or to be able to accept the fact that we would treat individuals as slaves. So we were dehumanized, only 3/5 human. And so we did not have the right to vote. So in passing this new legislation, the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th Amendment, one of the things that would happen was that slavery would be abolished. And with the abolition of slavery, we then see the 14th Amendment coming in and giving citizenship rights to those born or naturalized in the United States. Now, this was something that was not just for the American, but this is also something that benefited immigrants from the South, from Mexico, and as well as the Native Americans who were not yet a part, even though this was their land. And then the 15th Amendment that brought in the right for all citizens. So we were considered citizens, and then we were getting the right for all citizens, given the right to vote. Now, we need to understand this entire period following slavery was called Reconstruction. And it went for a period from 1863 to 1877. I know that if you can hold on to this history lesson, you'll begin to understand some of the things that we're talking about, and it will help you to understand how these systems and these policies and these ideologies found their ways into our nation's systems. All right. And so there was an attempt by the U.S. government to address the inequalities and protect the rights of these newly enfranchised African Americans through policies that would now make us free and equal. However, there's something called Jim Crow laws. And that's what we saw. There was a resurgent late in the 1800s, about 1880s, resurgent of white supremacy. And this is something that's been in the news lately. Many of us think that white supremacy is only the Ku Klux Klan, or it's only, the skinheads. But white supremacy means a system in which the white race has the dominance over all of the races in an area. So when we say white supremacy, many of us only think hate group in its truest form, but it's really in terms of some of the ways in our ideology and the way we think about how we operate. And so there was a rollback on some of these advancements through this period called Jim Crow. Jim Crow laws, for those of you who don't know, were a system of separation to keep the races separate, to keep Black people in a position that was just above being a slave and not quite being a citizen of the nation. And we'll talk about these things a little bit more when we come back on the other side of this commercial break. Stay tuned for more United Shades of Gray.
United Shades of Gray will continue on WSGW.
So we're going to continue this conversation for those who are out there. I was still on the air, so we're going to continue this conversation. Stick in to this conversation. Invite somebody to the stream. If you have a question or it's something that you want clarified, by all means, feel free to jump out there and ask the question. We'll get to it as we can on this other side of this commercial break. So I don't want to go too far ahead on the other side of the commercial break. We'll continue pick this concept up from resurgence of white supremacy, and we'll talk about the systems and how they began to effectively become a part of how we govern and how we make policies and procedures, and why we came up with that term systemic racism. All right, and I'll share with you guys a situation that's particularly close to my heart because it's something that relates to my family and how all of this has played a role in our lives. So stick tuned, and we'll be right back with more of this conversation. Key time, yeah. All right.
The other group is neo-Nazis, and Reconstruction started after the Civil War. Even though slavery was still going on to some degrees down south, but you think of Reconstruction, you say after slavery, but slavery still happening.
Yep.
All right, so we're ready for part two. Yvonne said it's coming through fine.
Yeah, a couple of them have said. Mark was on here for a second and said that it was coming across great as well. So
I couldn't see Tony Rick on your screen, so I assume he showed up fine on the camera.
Do you see on your thing where it says to the right of your stream it says private chat and comments on your computer screen? Are you looking at?
Go down here. It says
on your stream guide.
I don't see it on here. I remember it somewhere. Oh, there's private chat.
Yeah.
Okay.
You click on.
It's private chat.
No, not private chat. Comments.
Comments. Okay. Oh, okay.
Okay. There you go.
Oh, okay.
So that's what now you can see the social media.
But I can't say if I'm want to turn the audio.
Yeah. No. But that's where I saw him at.
Part two?
Yes, sir.
You still got to do the promo too.
Okay.
Stand by.
You're listening to United Shades of Gray on WSGW.
Hello, this is Kareem Bowen, and we're back with more United Shades of Gray. We're going to take a break. We're going to rerun this real quick for those who are in radio social media land.
I can fix that.
Okay.
What happened here? I had my volume up too loud. Let's try it again.
You're listening to United Shades of Grey on WSGW.
Hello, this is Kareem. We're back with the second half of our conversation here. Thank you for tuning in to United Shades of Grey on WSGW. We're thankful for your listenership. All right, before the commercial break, we were talking, for those of you that are maybe just tuning in, we were talking about the origins of systemic racism in America, and we're going to talk about how they're going to interface and become ingrained into our systems in four key areas. That was education, our economic or our financial systems, housing, and education. And we will have, this is going to be a 4-part series. We will bring individuals in that will discuss these particular areas and how they are taking steps, both businesswomen, educational systems, presidents of universities will come in, and we're going to share on some meaningful steps. How do we recognize it? How do we recognize the need? And what are some meaningful steps that we can take if you are the owner of a business or a corporation, or you're heading something and you want to get involved and you say, hey, if racism does exist here within our system or in the way that we're doing things, how do we eradicate it and how do we begin to make meaningful change? We want to give you some insight on how to do just that. So we were talking about just, and you know, I'm sharing this information. It's a lot to share. I'm trying to just give you the tidbits, and the producer may want to make sure that we were very clear that slavery came, the Civil War took place, and the Civil War was really, you know, do we keep slaves or don't we keep slaves? That's really what, I mean, it boils down. That's what it was about. And so for many of you, when we talk about, and there was a great issue that was discussed for a period of time of last year about the statues and those things that remind us of the good old South. And we were talking about Confederate flags and some of those generals who were fighting for the South. One of the reasons those things are considered offensive for ADOS, African descendants of slaves, is because these things represented institutions and systems that kept us enslaved, that fought to keep us as free labor, that fought to keep us 3/5 human and not recognized as citizens of this great nation. And so when we look at after the Civil War, there was this idea or this concept of Jim Crow laws, which were dealt with suppressing African-American, these newly freed African-Americans, as, you know, in voter suppression, whether it was in employment. You are now free, but you were not free to live in any neighborhood that you wanted to. You were now free, but you could not work in any institution that you wanted to work. Now you got to think, if the leaders and the founding fathers of these organizations are former slave owners, and these are white men, now they got to figure out what to do with their plantation. Now they got to provide fair wages for anyone who works there, right? No, they did this thing called convict leasing. And they used the Jim Crow laws to make certain things illegal that were prevalent, that you would find prevalent among newly freed slaves. One, in fact, homelessness. Another one, in fact, unemployment. So those things now became crimes, which we found these slaves who were just recently freed back behind bars. And then these same plantation owners who were using these slaves for free could pay a nominal fee and have these same individuals work right back on the plantations that they were recently freed from. And that's what we call convict leasing. And so we see this taking place. And so Jim Crow laws are now creating policy. These laws that were meant to suppress blacks and the rights and their ability to move into certain areas, they are now policies that are being implemented in our penal systems. We now see the police officers, and this is where we talk about the beginning of the issue of how officers of the law were now being used to police black communities. They were trying to find out who was homeless. They were trying to find out who was unemployed. Why? So they could put them back in prison, so that these plantation owners could then have convict leasing, allow them to pay a nominal fee And they could treat these individuals worse, because if these got sick and died, they could just get rid of them and then go and lease some more African Americans. So we went from slavery, from ownership, to being leased, like you do an automobile. You either buy it or you lease it. If you're going to lease it, you're going to turn it in pretty soon. So you don't care how you treat that car, only that it meets the standard to be able to turn it in at the end of that lease, right? So we see all of these things now taking place as a part of Jim Crow laws. We see police officers, which were supposed to be a part of the community to really deal with issues of the community of safety, now being used as officers really militarized. They're going in, they're pulling people out that are homeless. They're pulling people out, trying to figure out who has a job, who is not working. And these rules that were put in place are allowing them to incarcerate these men once again. So this is a beginning of a bad relationship between officers of the law, which are now created to be policing communities, and African Americans or African descendants of slaves. So we go through a series of these things, and we see these things operational everywhere. The black man is now free. He now has the right to go and to live wherever he wants, hypothetically. But there was something called redistricting and red line, where they weren't allowed to go into certain areas. There were certain areas of business that they were not allowed to go. They weren't allowed to go into every institution. So that's why we see other individuals creating places where blacks could go into school. When we were talking about Tuskegee University, it's one of those universities that was created to allow black people the right to go to secondary education. And so all of these things are ways in which we begin to see that the ideologies of racism and how we think and how we feel began to become pervasive in the laws that we're creating, finding its way into the structures and the systems that are pervasive in America, that govern America, that how we operate, hence the term systemic racism. And so we're going to talk about how that impacts those four key areas in our nation, because we see those things. If it was in the Constitution, which governs our law, then it has to be in our laws. If a black man was not considered a whole man at the writing of the Constitution, as much as we see, we believe these truths to be self-evident, that all men, not including black men, because we were only 3/5 at the incite of this Constitution, we have to understand that if it began in our founding principles, that there's no way that it cannot exist in the systems that emanate and find their truth in those structures. So that's why we have to have this conversation. It's why we are all tired. Black folks are tired of fighting. White folks are tired of talking about it. But let's begin to say, let's push a little harder. There's a concept as we talk about bringing change and doing something. And this is what's so important. At the conclusion of this, well, not at the conclusion, at the height of what was going on with these cries for social justice after the George Floyd murders, I reached out to a number of business friends and connections that I had. And one of them invited me to something. This was actually before George Floyd, about 3 years ago. Gene Pickelman, who is one of the founders, and I think he may be the CEO of TriStar Bank. I was invited to something called cultural capitalism or conscious capitalism. And conscious capital, I always want to say cultural sensitivity, but it's conscious capitalism. And what conscious capitalism is that we, the idea in business is that someone has to win and someone has to lose. But there is this pervasive understanding, this understanding that is growing, that we don't have to have a lose-win, win-lose situation, but we can literally do business. America is a capitalist society. It doesn't mean that it's a dog-eat-dog world. It doesn't have to be that way. So we can do something called conscious capitalism. That means that we can use our thoughts, our understanding that all Americans deserve better, to create a situation that we're aware that there are some disparities in our system, that we're aware that business and education and entrepreneurship are areas that diversity brings greatness. And so we use those principles to begin to change how we operate and how we do business, to create opportunities to where we can all win. And upon that conversation, I began to reach out. I think it was Raj Sisodia, who's the CEO of Whole Foods, and Dick Garber were the speakers at that particular time. But I began to say, you know what? This is a great opportunity for us to challenge individuals who are allies to the Black community to say, listen, it's time to make change. And in doing so, we see a lot of individuals who are really stepping up. And that's why I think it's important that we bring this to the show. I'm going to bring them in. We're going to talk about how they're beginning to make changes in the way that they govern, in the way that they create policies, in the way that they hire, and in systems that they put in place, so that we can begin to get to the touchdown. I always say that diversity is the end goal. It is the touchdown. Everyone wants to make the big play. Getting into the end zone means that we have reached diversity. And diversity is the philosophy that all people are necessary, all people are welcome, all ideas, regardless of where they come from or who they come from. And that's, across the board, whether it's racial, economics, if it's sexual, that diversity creates the best of us all. So we're going to bring in those individuals that are leading in educational systems, that are leading in business systems, in housing and education and finance. And we're going to talk about them. We're going to talk with them about the steps that they have been willing to make change happen. And at the end of the day, it's about diversity. Diversity is a touch goal, but in order for diversity to happen, we've got to have equity and inclusion. So I want to continue with laying this foundation as we continue. There's a Pew Research that said out there that there's an incredible chasm. And those of us who are from the Black community, we understand this. There's a huge chasm between white people and Black people when it comes to generational wealth and household income. That has persisted and has widened since 1967. White people also have a net worth, which is 13 times greater than most Black household families. All right. So throwing money at this situation, just throwing money at Black problems and pouring into Black communities is not the issue at hand. And it is not the way to deal with the situation. It's about dismantling the racist systems that have created this type of system, and then continuing to work to perpetuate changes in these areas in such a way that we can grow and inequality can be addressed in a meaningful way. And I say that because many of us think that, hey, slavery was a bad thing. It happened. I've never owned a slave, so why should I be punished? And I want to speak to that as we round out the ending of this conversation. Rob, let me know how much time we got as we go. Okay, I want to share this with you guys. And this is a personal story. And as we take on that idea, that understanding, it's important for us to see how this happens. Okay. My family recently, I have a family member. I've shared this story on LinkedIn. It was a national program. I have a family member. Her name is Essie Patha Murkison. Perfect timing. Essie Patha Murkison. She is a Tony acclaimed actress. She's started off with like Pee-wee's Playhouse and things of that nature, but she's done feature films with Arnold Schwarzenegger. I think she was in Terminator 3, Radio. I think she's an amazing actress. She's done The Cosby Show, all of these things. She won a Tony for her Broadway work for Colored Girls Who Considered Suicide When the Rainbow Wasn't Enough. She was in the original cast. She was on a show titled Finding Our Roots, something that PBS did. And on Finding Our Roots, what they do is they reach out to African Americans whose history has been lost, and they begin a process of going back through DNA, looking through historical archives, and finding the lineage from where we are today here in America to where our ancestors, initially came from. And on this particular episode, Ipatha, who's my cousin, she decided to go on she would be my great grandmother's side. We called her Mama Pearl Bowen. They went through this and they found that my family were not necessarily, we were raised to go believe that Marion, Louisiana, which is a city right outside of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. That's where we all was, home base. When I went as a kid, went home, I went and visited Mama Pearl and Papa Bowen down in Louisiana, Marion, Louisiana, which is just across the bridge, across the ravine from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And what we found was that my family was brought there. We were sold by Jesuit priests, Catholic Jesuit priests. And this whole process, as you look at this, and this is really interesting, but this speaks to why we have to begin to dismantle these systems. They were sold into slavery by these Jesuit priests to pay to keep Georgetown University afloat. The New York Times did an article on this. They were called the 272. The Marion 272 is what the name of the group is. There were 272 men, women, and children that were sold by the Maryland Jesuits. And a portion of those proceeds was used to pay off the debts of Georgetown College, now Georgetown University. And in order to keep it a secret, because, you know, God is love, and they were also often trying to proselytize or to win these Black slaves over to Christianity or to the Catholic faith. They tried, but they didn't want to be seen as slave traders. So they hid, they removed, they covered up all of this stuff. Finding Our Roots on PBS. That's right. Henry Louis Gates is the host. Thank you, Rob, for getting this information. The series ran March 2012 to May 2021. You can still see those episodes if you get on YouTube or just Google that information. Henry Louis Gates. And so in there, they were slaves, they were sold. They didn't want people to know that the Catholic Church was involved in cattle trade and slave trading. And so they erased all of the names that were on this trade to keep it a secret. However, Georgetown University, because they were in a impending foreclosure, they needed to keep the records for that and also for the archives of their history in terms of how they were being able to fund themselves. My family was sold into slavery into Maringouin, Louisiana, to tobacco farmers and to cotton pickers and to sugarcane. So those are the areas which my fifth great grandfather, Isaac Hawkins, that was his name, was sold by Jesuit priests to keep Georgetown open. Now, this is the issue that we have to begin to understand. Now, these individuals were also 272 men, women, and children, like cattle, to pay off a debt for a school. No one in my family has ever attended Georgetown University. Not a single one. We don't have degrees from this prestigious university. We haven't gone to their institutions of learning. We have not been benefited in effect the prestige of one of their great degrees. However, my family was sold. My fifth great grandfather, Isaac Hawkins, was sold into slavery so that white Americans could continually send their children there, so that they could, you know, become doctors and lawyers and accountants and heads of businesses and entrepreneurs. So they received the benefit of what was going on. This was not slavery, not just being locked up, but it was about how we are now using this authority, this white supremacy, to not only dominate a people generationally, but also to build generational wealth off of that dominance. So we see this taking place, and I began to look at that. And just recently, on last year, 2 years ago, there was a vote that the students of Georgetown University, look, after finding out this information, the university put it to the students, and the students said, you know what, this is an atrocity that has to be right. We've got to get it right. And so what they did is they built a building titled Isaac Hawkins. And they said, this is, you know, Isaac Hawkins. He was sold in slavery to keep this university open. And we're so thankful to Isaac Hawkins that we built a resident hall to honor him. And my cousin went down and she took a picture of this, Rob. And this is what's crazy. They've acknowledged the wrong. The students have voted to pay reparations, which is the right thing to do. Reparations means that I acknowledge my wrong in this situation. The court systems do it all the time. I acknowledge my wrong. And so we're going to make whole, to the best of our ability, those who have been impacted, not only the immediate family. We saw this in the George Floyd case. The family got a settlement, which was considered reparations for the death of that young man. My family died, and many of them put to work as slaves for this university. And they put a building up acknowledging their wrong, but there was never any reparations. They didn't say, we're going to allow your kids to go to school here for free. We're going to provide you educational opportunities. None of those things happened. It was just an admonition of guilt. So we understand that slavery was wrong. I'll tell you, America, Black Americans, if no one else, African descendants of slaves, understand that slavery was wrong. And we understand that you don't have anything, you didn't play a part in enslaving us. However, if my family and where I am today, as a product of the generation of the loins and my roots and my DNA, have put me in a place that my forefathers were harmed by your forefathers, and you received a generational benefit from it, that it means that where you are in your place in life has an impact in terms of where I am. So when we look at this, and these are the systems, once again, this is an educational institution. This is that meets a religious institution that both came together for the benefit of keeping blacks oppressed. And so these things are in our systems. They tried to hide it, but it became like, it became pervasive. Now, this is the thing that's so important. Blacks have been given some opportunities. Now we don't have these pervasive things that exist. We've been given opportunities. We've even had a black president. Some people say, you know what? We've had a black president now. Things are equal. But the reality of a situation is they are not, because those same systems that existed to put us in the position that we were then are the same systems that are at play now. And so it will take time and effort and really us rolling up our sleeves and having conversations like this one today to begin to understand how these systems are at play and why it is so important for us to begin to dismantle. And I always say that we can change anything that we can have a conversation about. So to my white friends, to my white allies, to those who are listening to this conversation that are saying, I am so sick and tired of talking about race, I must say to you today with all love and sincerity in my heart, I am so tired of having to deal with the generational impact of my forefathers, your forefathers on my forefathers' lives. So, Rob, what are you saying over there? I see you shaking your head. What's going on?
I'm just saying, wow, that's deep. That's deep because it's true.
It's a true story. And so when we look at this, we have to understand that a couple scholarships here or something there does not change that situation. There is a system that exists. And that is just one example of the educational and the religious systems that govern our country or that are part of our country, the fabric of our country, how they are being impacted and how they have been infiltrated by these ideologies. But we also see those things in our policing systems, in our criminal justice system. We see this also in our home ownership. I need you to understand that one of the greatest assets or one of the key pieces of wealth in America is your home. And for so long, African Americans were not allowed the right to buy homes in particular areas. We weren't allowed to have financing to get certain homes. We now have some laws that are called redistricting and redlining that make it illegal to do those things. But the systems are yet in place. If we're ever going to change the outcome and where we are today, we have to begin to deal with the system. Somebody asked me about black on black crime, and I want to talk about this just one quick second. Someone says, why is there so much black? And when we talk about it, those of us who understand that you kill people that you're near. And as a matter of fact, crime in black communities is equidistant, or it's about equal to that crime in white America. And as a matter of fact, when we look at who is violent, that does not sway or turn toward black communities. I'll just say it that way. But when we look at why do blacks kill one another? Well, systems have destroyed. If I am being destroyed and my family is being ripped apart, who is my family no longer has the same meaning as it did before we were torn apart in slavery. So self-identity and reflecting and understanding our value goes a long, long way. So what I wanted to do on today, and I hope that I have had some level of success, those of you out there listening to us via social media, give me some feedback. Let me know what's going on. I wanted to lay a groundwork so that we could begin to understand systemic racism, how it became systemic, meaning embedded in our systems, so that we can then talk about, since we know that there is a possibility of this existence, I'm convinced of this thing, how do we begin to make change happen? And not only how do we begin, but who are those heroes? I want to bring some of our white allies, some of our brothers and sisters on the other side of the racial line who are committed to making change happen. I'll tell you, there's two companies that are out there that I'm working with that are doing amazing things. That's Dow Global. They have made a very committed effort to seeing change happen, as well as Hemlock Semiconductor. We'll have leadership from those companies here to talk about this a little bit more. Thank you guys for tuning into this conversation. And as always, take care of yourselves and each other. Grace and peace.